Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, come off, then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming the Professor Kevin Artez. Professor Kevin is a professor of finance at Alliance Manchester Business School. He holds a PhD degree from Lancaster University. His research interests are in the area of theoretical and empirical cross-sectional assets pricing, empirical corporate finance, and econometrics. He has published into ranking journals such as the Journal of Finance, Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis, Management Science, Review of Finance, Journal of Corporate Finance, Journal of Banking and Finance, and International Journal of Frequency. Now we will start our seminar with dear Professor Kevin.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present my work here, Muhammad. The title of the paper that I'm going to present today is Uncertainty Creates Zombie Firms, Implications for Industry Dynamics and Creative Destruction. The paper is joint work together with my long-term collaborator, Murillo Campello, who's now at the University of Florida, Murillo's former PhD student, Gaurav Kankanhali, who is working at Pitts, and my former PhD student, Kevin Schneider, who's at the moment a postdoc at Cambridge, but will join Arizona next year. Now, in this paper here, we look into zombie firms. What exactly is a zombie firm? A zombie firm is a financially distressed firm that manages to hang on because its creditors support it with subsidized credit. Why are creditors willing to do so? Because they speculate on the recovery of the distressed borrowers. So there is a risk-shifting motive behind corporate zombification. The main argument we make in our paper is that healthy, rational firms do not only care about existing zombies in their market, as shown in the literature, but they also care about the threat of uncertainty-induced future zombification. Let me start by showing you that corporate zombification is an important real-world problem. So here's an article from The Economist from 2020, What to Do About Zombie Firms. Here's an article from Forbes from 2021, Evergrande is face of zombies stalking China's economy. And finally, here's an article from the Financial Times from 2015, South Korea takes aim at zombie companies. This final article is of particular interest to us because in the last section of our paper, we directly look into the global shipping industry. I probably won't have the time to discuss these tests in this presentation here. Now, let me start by motivating our study. Anecdotal evidence suggests that high economic uncertainty produces a large number of zombie firms. Think, for example, about Japan's lost decade, the European sovereign debt crisis, or China's recent real estate crisis. Now, existing work on zombies shows that existing zombies can suck the life out of healthy rival firms. What exactly do I mean by this? I mean that existing zombies tie up resources such as capital and labor, which can no longer be employed by their rival firms. This was first shown in the seminal study by Caballero et al. 2008, who look into the Japanese context. There are also a number of studies by Ashaya who look into the European context. Now, in contrast to these studies, we are going to show that rational forward-looking firms do not only care about existing zombies in their market, they already consider the threat of uncertainty-induced future zombification in their corporate policies. So here's our paper in a nutshell. In the first part of the paper, we develop a theoretical model shedding light on the impact of zombie firms on healthy rivals. In the second part of the paper, the empirical one, we ask three fundamental questions. The first question is, does a higher aggregate uncertainty produce more zombie firms? If the answer to that question is yes, then the second question we ask is, how can we statistically identify, measure the threat of uncertainty-induced future zombification? Once we have tackled that challenge, we then look into the relation between the threat of uncertainty-induced future zombification and important corporate policies and real outcomes of healthy rival firms. So let me give you some more details. In the theoretical part of our paper, we develop a real options-based industry competition model in which two types of firms, equity only and equity and levered firms, compete based on output choices. Now, the equity and debt financed firms, the levered firms, have to make their debt payments out of their operating profitability. The upshot is, if operating profitability drops sufficiently, these firms default, and creditors then either have the option to roll over their debt, to turn them into zombies, or to liquidate them. And we are going to show you that under a higher economic uncertainty, there is a greater incentive to zombify. In the empirical part of our paper, we then come up with a proxy for the expectation of uncertainty-induced zombification. I will have a lot more to say about this proxy later on. In a nutshell, we run rolling window panel regressions of a zombie dummy on the left-hand side, on lagged aggregate economic uncertainty on the right-hand side, firm controls, macro controls, firm fixed effects. We take the out-of-sample prediction from this rolling window regression as our measure for the threat of uncertainty-induced zombification. We then link this threat to the real decisions of two types of firms, US public firms. So we look into Compustat and YTS establishment level data here. And then second, the global sample of private and public shipping firms. We look into Clarkson data here. In a nutshell, we establish a link between expected zombification and, for example, investment, disinvestment, recruitment decisions, and then also real outcomes such as total factor productivity, capacity overhang, and so on. Our empirical evidence shows that healthy firms become more reluctant to undertake costly to reverse decisions in the presence of a greater threat of corporate zombification. So these healthy firms slow down their investment, their disinvestment, and they also hire fewer new workers. In turn, these healthy firms become less productive and they attract lower market valuations. Now, somewhat surprisingly, at least to us, we also show that these healthy firms become more innovative under a greater threat of corporate zombification. And we believe the reason is that these firms try to escape the threat of zombification by differentiating their products from the products sold by their zombie rivals. So our novel measure of expected zombification shows that high uncertainty triggers what we call a zombie uncertainty multiplier. What exactly do I mean by the zombie uncertainty multiplier? In our theoretical model, the only source of uncertainty is demand uncertainty. The possibility of zombification adds to this uncertainty because healthy rival firms ask themselves, do our levered competitors default? And if yes, when? Even upon a default, they ask themselves, do creditors turn the defaulting borrowers into zombie companies? And even if yes, they then ask themselves, how long will the zombie companies manage to hang on? How long will the zombie companies stay in our market? Okay. The nice aspect of our paper is that it connects two strands of the literature that currently do not speak to one another. On the one hand, we have the literature on the effect of uncertainty on corporate investment. Seminal theoretical contributions here are Bernanke, 1983, and Bloom, 2009. There is also a lot of empirical support for the predictions derived by the theoretical papers. On the other hand, there is an entirely separate literature on corporate zombies. The seminal theoretical studies in that literature are Caballero et al. 2008. There is also a relatively recent paper by Ashaya et al. The latest version I read was 2021. I think there's now an updated version. The predictions derived from these theoretical models are largely supported in a large number of empirical studies. Now, the idea of our paper is to say, if there is a risk-shifting motive behind corporate zombification, and risk-shifting motives become amplified in periods of higher economic uncertainty, then it must be the case that economic uncertainty increases, the incentive of creditors to zombify increases, and the number of zombies emerging increases as well. Now, rational, forward-looking, healthy firms are aware of this dynamic, and so therefore they adjust their corporate policies not only to zombies that are already in their market, but already to the possibility of future uncertainty producing new zombie firms. Okay, I'm going to give you a very short overview of our theoretical model. So we use a Carnot competition in this industry equilibrium model to shed light on the effect of zombie firms on healthy rivals. There are two types of infinitely small firms in our industry. These firms produce a similar, in fact identical output good, and they compete based on output choices. We are in a Carnot competition setting. The first type of firm are 100% equity financed firms. These are our healthy firms. The residual are equity and debt financed firms. These equity and debt financed firms can default if their operating profits drop to a sufficiently low level. These are the potential zombies in our model. At the start of the model, both type of firms are exactly identical. So both types of firm start with the same amount of capacity, bar capital K. Bar capital K should be seen as a real option to produce output at a convex production cost function given by capital C of capital Q. Capital Q is the output choice. Now, we allow the healthy firms to not only optimally decide on their output in each instance, they are also able to expand and contract their capacity so they have investment and disinvestment options. In contrast to that, we allow the potential zombies to only choose their output. So these firms can't invest or disinvest. We do not allow them to invest. The idea here is that they are so over-levered that no one would give them financing to invest. And then there are some internal frictions, maybe arising from managers, also preventing these firms from disinvesting. We cannot allow these firms to disinvest because if they could leave the market through the back door. And clearly, for one reason or another, that's not happening in the real world. Okay. The industry output price, capital P, is given by a downward sloping demand curve. So we have this stochastic variable demand theta minus the slope of the demand curve gamma multiplied by the aggregate amount of output produced in the industry. The aggregate amount of output produced in the industry can be decomposed into the output produced by the unlevered, the healthy firms, and the amount of output produced by the levered potential zombie firms. Now, it's this downward sloping demand curve here which allows the zombie firms to have an effect on the healthy firms. Why is this the case? Well, assume that we are in a world without corporate zombification. the industry enters a recession, so demand drops. Upon demand dropping, the levered firms default, and because there is no corporate zombification, creditors liquidate the defaulting borrowers. The second integral, this one here, is going to disappear, right? So upon this second integral disappearing, the industry output price is then going to shoot up because of the exit of the highly levered firms. So the exit of the highly levered firms ensures that the industry output price can recover in a recession. Now imagine a world with perfect zombification, right? So once again, industry demand drops, the highly levered firms default, creditors convert all highly levered firms into zombies, the second integral does not disappear. So the presence of the zombie firms effectively prevents the industry output price from recovering in a recession. Now, these effects are obviously stronger when the slope of the demand curve is more positive, right? So a more positive gamma value allows for a stronger effect of zombies on healthy firms. Okay, industry demand is exogenous and modeled by a Markov switching geometric Brownian motion. So the differential of demand is equal to the sum of this drift term and this stochastic term. The drift term parameter alpha subscript capital X and the volatility parameter sigma subscript capital X depend on the state. The industry can be in one of two states. It can be in a capital L recession state and a capital H expansion state. Now, unsurprisingly, we are going to assume that demand drift is lower in the recession than in the expansion. In fact, drift is negative in the recession, but conversely, volatility is higher in the recession than in the expansion. We've taken these values here from the famous paper of Bloom et al. 2018. So if you don't like them, you have to complain to them and not to us. We're then also going to come up with a transition probability matrix. So the transition probability matrix gives you the probability of currently being in one of the two regimes and moving into the other regime in the future. Now, to close off the model, here are the financial assumptions. We are assuming that the highly levered firms must pay a continuous coupon given by C greater than 0. Because the highly levered firms cannot store cash and they are unable to hedge, they must meet this coupon payment out of their operating profits. So the upshot is that if operating profits drop to a sufficiently low level, the highly levered firms default. Now, upon a default, lenders have two options. They can either roll over debt and turn the defaulting borrowers into zombies, or they can liquidate them. Now, the rollover takes the form of a payment in kind. In a nutshell, creditors approach defaulting borrowers and say, look, we allow you to pay us whatever you can over the foreseeable future until you become able to pay the higher renegotiated coupon C star. Now, in making that decision, creditors know that their payment from defaulting borrowers can never drop below the threshold B. B is the government bailout threshold, right? So if the payment drops below B, the government steps in and makes up the residual. Now we're going to see on the next slide that B is quite important for our model. We then assume that upon creditors liquidating defaulting borrowers, they receive a random and firm-specific liquidation value. The natural logarithm of the liquidation value is drawn from a normal distribution with some state-specific mean and state-specific volatility. Now let's take a closer look at the effect of this government bailout threshold B. So in the absence of a government bailout threshold, you can see that the payment to creditors from the rolled over debt is concave in the operating profits of the defaulting borrowers. Now, what that means is that a higher economic uncertainty makes the option to roll over debt less attractive. It becomes less attractive because under a higher economic uncertainty, the expected payment from defaulting borrowers decreases. Let's now take a look into the case in which there is a government bailout threshold. So in the graph here on the right-hand side, we assume that the government bailout threshold is equal to 0.5. We're also going to assume that the defaulting borrowers default closer to the government bailout threshold than to the renegotiated debt. You can clearly see that the government bailout threshold turns the payment to creditors locally convex in the operating profits of the defaulting borrowers. So if the defaulting borrowers default close to small b, then a higher economic uncertainty increases the expected payment from defaulting borrowers and therefore makes rolling over debt more attractive. Okay, I'm almost done with the theoretical part. So as in all real options model, the value of an unlevered firm, a healthy firm, is then the sum of the values of three types of options: the assets in place. These are real options to produce output. The investment options, these are real options to acquire more options to produce output at a certain exercise price, capital I. And the disinvestment options, these are options to sell off installed options to produce output at a specific resale gain. Now note that the resale gain needs to be lower than the investment cost, otherwise the firm has a money machine. Now, importantly, the values of all of these real options depend not only on the number of existing zombies in the market, but they also depend on expected zombification, the expected number of zombies which show up in the market in the future. Okay. In order to extract some theoretical conclusions from our theoretical model, we do a simulation exercise. In the simulation exercise, we compare the behavior of one arbitrary healthy firm in two types of economies: in an economy with a low zombification threat, so in an industry in which there are only a very small number of levered firms, and in an industry with a high threat, an industry in which there are a large number of highly levered firms. We then create one single sample path for demand. I'm going to show you this path. So we're going to assume that demand starts at a value of 100. It remains relatively stable over the first 10 years. After 10 years, we enter a recession. That's the gray shaded area. Demand slightly drops. We leave the recession after 2.5 years. Demand recovers, in fact increases, until we reach the start of year 20. At the start of year 20, we enter the second recession. In the second recession, there is a first dip in demand. Demand stabilizes, and then there's a second dip in demand. And the highly levered firms in our simulation exercise, they default close to the second dip in demand in the second recession. So let me go back. So the exact default point depends on the number of highly levered firms. So in the low threat economy, the default point is t equal to 25. In the high threat economy, it's t equal to 23. Okay, we're now going to contrast the investment and disinvestment decisions of the one arbitrary healthy firm across the low and the high threat economy. On the x-axis here, we have the installed capacity of the healthy firm. Increases in capacity are investment. Decreases in capacity are disinvestment. On the x-axis, we have time. The gray shaded areas are again recession periods. The vertical black line, that's the default point. Now, contrasting these two graphs, you can clearly see that a greater threat of corporate zombification makes the healthy firm more reluctant to change its capacity, more reluctant to either invest or disinvest. The line here in the graph on the right-hand side is clearly less volatile than the line in the graph on the left-hand side. And that's the main takeaway from this exercise here. So we've done other simulation exercises. I don't have the time to discuss them. Let me move on to the model summary and testable implications. So our theoretical work shows that a higher economic uncertainty gives creditors greater incentives to turn defaulting borrowers into zombies. The reason is that there's a risk-shifting motive behind corporate zombification due to the government bailout threshold. So a higher uncertainty amplifies risk-shifting motives. Creditors are more likely to zombify defaulting borrowers. Now, rational forward-looking firms are aware of this dynamic and they take it into account when making their corporate decisions. So in particular, we show theoretically a greater threat of uncertainty-induced zombification leads healthy firms to invest less, disinvest less, hire fewer workers. In turn, that depresses industry activity and it worsens the valuation of the healthy firms in the industry. We call this the zombie uncertainty multiplier. We also show in our theoretical work that these effects are more pronounced in case of costlier to reverse decisions and in more competitive industries, so in industries in which the slope of the demand curve, this gamma parameter, is more positive. Okay, we now come to our empirical work. So our theory predicts that expected zombification should be a first-order driver of firms' capital allocation decisions and performance. To empirically test this prediction, we need to measure expected zombification. How exactly do we do so? We do so in two steps. In the first step, we identify corporate zombies based on the interest coverage ratio, the Z-score, and some clever strategy identifying firms which receive subsidized credit. After we have identified zombie firms, we then run rolling window panel regressions of a dummy variable on the left-hand side on aggregate uncertainty on the right-hand side, firm controls, macro controls, firm fixed effects. We take the out-of-sample prediction of this rolling window regression as our forward-looking threat of corporate zombification. So let me give you the details. Let's start with the identification of zombie firms. We follow Ashaya et al. 2022 and Altman et al. 2024 in identifying zombie firms. So in line with Altman et al., we say a standard zombie is a firm that has an interest coverage ratio below 1, so is unable to meet its current debt obligations out of its operating profits, and also has a Z-score below 0, so is highly financially distressed. We then showed our paper to Viral Ashaya, and Viral said, that's all good and fine, but I'm not going to buy your results unless you also require zombie firms to be credit subsidized. So we said, okay, fine, let's come up with a second zombie definition. So we come up with a credit subsidized zombie is a standard zombie who also receives credit subsidies. How do we identify credit subsidies? We simply compare the interest rate paid by a firm, which is just interest expense scaled by total debt, with the lowest possible theoretical interest rate in the market at the minute. So in a nutshell, what we do is we look into capital IQ data to find the amount of short-term bank debt, long-term bank debt, and corporate bonds held by a firm. We combine the weights associated with these instruments with the prime rates. We sum up, and that is the currently theoretically lowest possible rate paid by the most solvent firms in the economy. If the current firm pays an interest rate below the theoretically most favorable rate, we say the firm is credit subsidized. Now, we verify our two zombie definitions using deal scan data. So what we do is we regress the all drawn in spread in column 1, a dummy variable equal to 1 if a loan is collateralized and else 0 in column 2, a dummy variable equal to 1 if a loan is handed out by a single lender and else 0 on first, a dummy variable equal to 1 if a firm is classified by us as a standard zombie and else 0, firm and loan controls taken from the prior literature, static industry fixed effects, and static time period fixed effects. Now you can clearly see from the table that zombies receive loans with lower interest rates, with a lower all drawn in spread, with a lower probability of collateral, and with a higher probability of these loans being given out by a single lender. Okay, so we then come to the first fundamental question of our paper. And the first fundamental question of our paper is whether a higher economic uncertainty produces more corporate zombies. In order to find out, we run panel regressions of, on the left-hand side, there is a dummy variable equal to 1 if a firm is classified as a standard or credit subsidized zombie and else 0. On the right-hand side, we have a lagged proxy for economic uncertainty. We have some firm and macroeconomic controls, and we also have firm fixed effects. Now, what proxies do we use for aggregate economic uncertainty? Well, the popular ones, right? The ones that everyone is using. We're using the VIX fear index. We use textual analysis-based expected market volatility. We use textual analysis-based expected political uncertainty. The statistical measures of Jurado et al. 2016 of financial, real, and macroeconomic uncertainty, average realized variance, and averaged implied variance. Now you can clearly see that independent of the economic uncertainty measure we use, we always find a significant positive relation, right? There is more zombification in periods of a higher economic uncertainty. Good. So we then thought we're not going to carry 8 different uncertainty proxies with us through the whole paper. Especially not since the 8 proxies are highly correlated. So what do? We run a principal component analysis on the 8 uncertainty proxies. We extract the first principal component and we use this first principal component as our main measure of economic uncertainty. In the table here on the left-hand side, you see the loadings of the 8 uncertainty proxies on the first 4 principal components. That's panel A. In panel B, most importantly, you see the explained variation. If you take a look at the loadings on the first principal component, you notice they are all positive and of roughly the same magnitude. So this first principal component is a level factor. That's what it's often called in principal component analysis. Very loosely speaking, the first principal component is just the scaled average of the 8 uncertainty proxies. If we just use the average of the 8 uncertainty proxies, all of our empirical results would show up as well. Okay, so how then do we measure expected zombification? We start from the 50 Hoberg and Phillips 2016 product markets. For each of these product markets, we then run a 12-year rolling window panel regression of, on the left-hand side, a dummy variable equal to 1 if a firm is classified as a standard or a credit subsidized zombie. On the right-hand side, our lagged first principal component of uncertainty controls fixed effects. So what controls do we use? We use Macro variables as first moment proxies. We also use the standard firm level controls. So the macro controls include GDP growth, labor force, inflation, and the interest rate. The firm controls include size, aged, lagged zombification status, and firm fixed effects. Now, for complicated econometrics reasons, you cannot run a predictive panel regression using fixed effects. At least you cannot estimate such a regression using OLS. You get biased coefficients. Now, in order to avoid bias in coefficients, what we do in order to estimate this model here is we recursively demean both the left-hand side and the right-hand side variables. I'm not going to go into detail. I just want to clarify that we avoid the bias normally arising in these type of regressions. Now, for a specific rolling window regression, we then simply take the estimate on the slope coefficient on the uncertainty principal component, and we multiply this with the value of the uncertainty principal component at the end of the rolling window. That's what you see here at the bottom of the slide. So we take the estimated coefficient and we multiply that with the value of the uncertainty principal component at the end of the 12-year rolling window. My co-authors then insist on taking this product and plugging it into a logit function. I'm not really sure why we're doing it. So the main reason for doing that is to ensure that the product is positive. I don't find that very important. It doesn't really matter whether we plug into a logit function or not. The results are virtually identical. My preference would be to not have this logit function here, but 4 people on the paper, it's a democracy, and if 3 people want to do it, what can you do? Okay. We then gauge the impact of zombification or the threat of uncertainty-induced zombification on healthy rival firms using the following panel regression. On the left-hand side, we have one real decision of firm I operating in product market J in state S over year T. On the right-hand side, we have expected zombification in product market J at the start of the year. We again have controls and fixed effects. Now the controls include first moment proxies, second moment proxies, and firm level variables. The first moment controls are state GDP growth, state labor force, regional inflation, and interest rate. The second moment control, and that's particularly important, is industry level implied volatility. Why is this second moment control so important? If we go back to the prior slide, we initially didn't control for second moments. Not doing so, some readers were suggesting to us, if all the coefficients, if all the zombie sensitivities beta here are similar, let's say they are all close to 1, what you're doing in your second state regression is you're simply regressing on scaled uncertainty. And we know that scaled uncertainty affects important corporate real decisions. Now, in order to mitigate that concern, we are effectively keeping uncertainty fixed, constant, by including it on the right-hand side. So all of the variation in our expected zombification variable then comes from the zombie sensitivity, the beta coefficient. Good. Firm controls, size, cash flow, Tobin's Q, fixed effects, static, firm, dynamic, industry, time period, fixed effects. What real decisions do we look into? We use Compostat data to look into capital investment, that's CapEx scaled over total assets, and disinvestment, that's sale of property, plant, and equipment over gross property, plant, and equipment. We use YTS establishment level data to look into establishment openings and closures. Establishment openings are simply the number of new establishments over a year divided by the number of existing establishments at the start of the year. And then equivalently for closures, closures is simply the number of closed down establishments over the year over the number of existing establishments at the start of the year. We also look into employment growth. That's simply the percentage change in the total number of workers at these establishments. So here are our Compustat panel regression outcomes. In columns 1 and 2, we regress investment on the left-hand side or disinvestment on expected zombification calculated using our standard zombie definition. In columns 3 and 4, we use expected zombification calculated from our credit subsidized zombie definition. As I said before, we have firm controls, macro controls, static firm fixed effects, dynamic industry by time period fixed effects. You can clearly see from this table here that a greater threat of uncertainty-induced corporate zombification leads the healthy, the non-zombie firms in our data to slow down their investment and to slow down their disinvestment. Now, these effects are not only statistically significant, they are also economically significant. So a 1 standard deviation increase in expected zombification lowers, say, investment by 5% of its sample mean. Here are the results. I'm going to skip this because I don't have that much time left. Here are the results from the YTS data. So in case of the YTS panel regressions, we have on the left-hand side establishment openings, column 1, establishment closures, column 2, employment growth, column 3. Everything else is the same as before. I only show you the results for the standard zombie definition. They're pretty similar for the credit subsidized one. You can clearly see from this table here that a greater threat of uncertainty-induced corporate zombification leads the healthy firms to open fewer new establishments, to close fewer existing establishments, and to recruit fewer workers. Here are some real effects. So now we put on the left-hand side the marginal product of capital. That's a complicated label for sales divided by assets. Total factor productivity obtained from a log-Cobb-Douglas production cost function. Capacity overhang calculated according to this groundbreaking paper by Aretz and Pope. And Tobin's Q, this is just the standard definition. You can clearly see from the table, a greater threat of uncertainty-induced zombification makes firms less profitable and productive, increases marginally their capacity overhang, and lowers their valuation. Okay, Murillo is a standard corporate finance person, so he always insists on also looking into some standard corporate finance variables. So we also put on the left-hand side cash savings, inventory, total payouts, including dividends and share repurchases, debt financing and equity financing. A greater threat of uncertainty-induced corporate zombification leads the healthy firms to save more cash, probably for precautionary motives, to lower their inventory holdings, probably because they have poorer sales prospects, to pay out less money to investors, to raise less equity financing, and to raise less debt financing, and to insignificantly also raise less equity financing. Okay, I'm almost done. I'm only going to describe 2 additional tests in 1 or 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to finish this talk here. So one of the central predictions of our theoretical model is that the threat of corporate zombification should be more important in industries in which the slope of the demand curve, this gamma parameter, is more positive. That is in price taking, not price making industries. Now, in order to test this prediction, we look into NBER markup data. So we sort our sample into high and low NBER markup firms. A high NBER markup means that you're a price taker. You don't really care about zombies. A low markup means you're a price... A high markup means you're a price maker. You don't care about zombies. A low markup means you're a price taker. You care a lot. And that's exactly what we find in the data. I can show you the table. So these here are the high markup firms. These here are the low markup firms. Only the low markup firms react to the threat of uncertainty-induced zombification. The high markup firms, they don't care. And then finally, we show that a greater threat of uncertainty-induced corporate zombification makes healthy firms more innovative. Why would that be the case? Because the healthy firms try to escape the threat of zombification by differentiating their products from the products sold by their competitors. So they engage in more innovation in order to artificially lower the slope of the demand curve, right? To make their output price less sensitive to the amount of output produced by the highly levered firms. I'm just going to quickly show you the table. Here it is. So now we have on the left-hand side patent count, citation count, and then this wonderful patent breakthrough variable, which is from a recent AER publication. So you can see a greater threat of corporate zombification leads healthy firms to produce more patents, to produce more widely cited patents, and to engage in more breakthrough innovation. Okay, I'm going to stop here. So I'm going to skip the entire analysis based on shipping firms, unfortunately, simply because I don't have any time. The conclusion. So firms preemptively respond to the threat of uncertainty-led corporate zombification. We show theoretically that creditors optimally zombify when uncertainty is high. The reason is there is a risk-shifting motive behind corporate zombification. Expected zombification induces cuts to investment and disinvestment. We call this the zombie uncertainty multiplier. We find strong results for public US firms, but also for the global sample of public and private shipping firms. Our results are more important, they are stronger in the sample of price-taking firms, the sample of firms which should have a greater slope of the demand curve. So we point to a novel channel through which uncertainty and zombie firms shapes firms' capital accumulation. All in all, we show nuanced effects on creative destruction. So while healthy firms slow down capital reallocation, we also have some evidence that a greater threat of zombification makes them more innovative, makes them come up with more modern, with newer products. Thank you very much. That's the presentation.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Kevin, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation and excellent paper. Thank you very much. Now, if anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. Masoud?
Hi everyone.
Yeah.
I'm surprised I was chosen to be the first person to maybe make a comment. In fact, thank you very much for the detailed presentation. The zombie firm case has always puzzled me because I don't pretend to understand maybe 10% of it. I find it very confusing. So I have two related points. Maybe if I start from the end of your presentation, when you summed up and you talked maybe about at least one positive, the existence of the zombie firms leads the healthy firms maybe to be innovative and so on. So and I like to link this to the title of the presentation, which says uncertainty creates zombie firms. So I want to reverse that and suggest maybe that zombie firms create uncertainty in the sense that while some healthy firms, protect themselves and may become innovative, others, by being tempted to acquire, for example, to acquire zombie firms in the sense that they are easy targets, they are not doing well, and if we acquire them, we will make a better business. And then it turns out that it was the wrong decision. So I think there is evidence that the acquisition or probably merger with a zombie firm doesn't live up to the expectation of the investor, the healthy firm that invested in it. So in that sense, I'm suggesting maybe we should also think about to what extent zombie firms also create uncertainty and jeopardize maybe long-term investments for other companies. This is my first point. I can mention the second point, maybe pause and wait for your reply and then mention the second point.
Oh, okay. So I totally agree, right? So in our theoretical, there's only one source of uncertainty in our theoretical model, and that's the demand uncertainty driving variation in the output price. But it's clearly the case that the possibility of zombification magnifies the existing uncertainty in the economy, right? So you're absolutely right that it goes in both directions. So uncertainty gives creditors more incentives to zombify, but then the possibility or already existing zombies also magnify the uncertainty currently in the economy. And while that is absolutely clear from our theoretical model, you are right to point out that in our empirical tests, we only look into, the one way of travel, right? We only look into how does uncertainty affect corporate zombification, not the other way around.
Yeah. Can I mention my second point? Is that
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Right. My second point, if like going back to what I believe I understand what a zombie firm is and how that status is measured, let's say probably mainly in terms of its profit performance and the interest cover ratio. So if I look at that, is there a possibility, do you think, that zombie firms, or maybe some of them, deliberately manipulate their accounting policies to show themselves in that situation to then, be able to approach banks to give them cheap credit? Because probably either they're small or they're not in a position where they can, let's say, issue bonds or raise capital through the capital markets, and therefore probably the only viable source for them to get credit or get funding is through the banks, and maybe by showing themselves in a situation where they're struggling, simply by manipulating their accounting policies, that maybe makes the banks, if you like, take that decision. And there are plenty of banks that the zombie firms are there. Most of them, I believe, is because banks offer them that cheap credit, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
So my question, in a way, if you like, to what extent banks scrutinize the financial accounts, whether interim or whether published accounts, if they have published accounts, to what extent they do a detailed analysis of those firms before they say, yeah, we're happy to help you?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I mean, it is very challenging to identify zombie firms in the data, right? And I think that's partially the reason why most existing papers use a different identification strategy, right? So our identification strategy is slightly different from the one of Caballero et al. Caballero et al. Is slightly different from the one used by Ashaya. They all basically try to capture financially distressed firms, firms that are over-levered, that have too much debt, firms that cannot pay their debt obligations out of their operating profits, and firms that in one way or another attract subsidized credit. Now, could distressed firms somehow make them selves look more attractive to be zombified. I think no one has ever looked into this, but I think there is a distinct possibility. Yeah, that's a very, very good suggestion. I've never thought about this before, but I think that could be the case.
So it's food for thought, isn't it?
Yes, it's food. So I can't give you a definite answer because we haven't done it. We've never looked into this, but it's a very, very good idea. I've noted it down, and let's see.
The reason I mentioned in this seminar series, for example, I think not long ago we talked, I think, about earnings management. I was just thinking along those lines of, like, companies are known to
Yes.
do what the Americans call hocus pocus, play all sorts of gimmickry, accounting gimmickry, and so on. And I thought, why not this one? Okay,
Absolutely.
Particularly when their possible sources of finance are very limited. Okay.
Yeah. We're going to look into it.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers.
Are there other questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. NG? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. There is some questions here. Someone asked about the indigeneity problem. The article addresses indigeneity through instrumental variables. Are there he should suggest to use other alternative methods to capture the variations in uncertainty, including simplifications.
So hang on. What other proxies for uncertainty?
Yes.
What could other proxies for uncertainty be?
He asked about the indigeneity. Yeah.
So we have a test in the paper, in the most recent version, in which we have some sort of shock to uncertainty. That works. What we don't have in the paper is a shock to zombification incentives. And so from that perspective, our paper is more of a correlation-based study, right? So we don't do causal inference on zombification incentives. We would love to do so, but so far we haven't found a good ID variable.
Thank you. Other questions about the external validity of functions. He asked about the ability of generalize the result of the paper.
So generalize it to other countries, or
Yeah.
we haven't done that, right? So we've generalized it to the global shipping industry, in which we have not only public firms, but private and public, and from all very few firms in the shipping sample are from the US, right? There are loads of firms from Greece in that sample, because it turns out that a lot of shipping companies are from Greece. Our evidence holds in the shipping sample. We haven't looked into any other samples.
Another question asked about, could you please explain the economic significance of the result?
They are very, so we've looked into economic significance, and the results are meaningful. So in fact, we benchmarked the effect of expected zombification against the effect of existing zombification, and they seem to be in the same ballpark, right? So it does seem to be the case that they have roughly the same effect on the policies of healthy firms.
Someone asked about explore the heterogeneous effect. Investigate how the effects of uncertainty, including zombifications, vary across firm characteristic.
Right. We haven't done that yet, right? So we only run we only condition our results on effects predicted by our theoretical model. We haven't conditioned on any other firm or bank characteristics. That's a good point. I guess that's a fair point. We can do that.
And microeconomic conditions. Yeah.
Oh, also on, okay, yes.
Yeah. Is there another questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. The last questions, what you suggest for future research in this area, dear Professor Kevin?
So I've just started a new project, unfortunately not with this co-authors, but with a woman from Virginia. And we are very interested in zombie firms in the airline industry, right? And so she has collected very unique data on US airlines. And the idea here is to look a bit deeper into the effect of zombie companies, right? In fact, on whether zombie companies lead healthy firms to change their service quality, right? So the idea here is pretty much, let's say you're an airline flying from A to B, right? And you have another airline, a zombie, flying exactly the same route. And the zombie is offering terrible service quality. Would you perhaps also decide to lower your service quality, right? Because your competitor is no longer offering good quality. Maybe you're tempted to reduce your quality as well. But we're at the very start, right? So we have zero empirical results so far. We just started this project a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you. There's another questions. If you don't have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. Thank you very much, dear Professor Kevin, for
Thank you so much. That was
contribution.
really, really nice.
Yeah, and thank
Very
you
helpful.
everyone joining us today. Thank you very much, dear Professor Kevin, for taking the time to present it to us. It's been appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
And I hope to see you soon in Egypt. You are very, very welcome.
We are definitely going to return to Egypt. We like the country a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon, Mohamed. Bye.
Bye-bye.